Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. Today's story is a German telling of a folktale, a story that I'm sure you are familiar with. It's been told many times by many storytellers and has its roots in history. This is the brothers Grimm's version of The Children of Hameln. In the year 1284, a mysterious man appeared in Hameln. He was wearing a coat of many-colored bright cloth, for which reason he was called the Pied Piper. He claimed to be a rat-catcher, and he promised that for a certain sum he would rid the city of all mice and rats. The citizens struck a deal, promising him a certain price. The rat-catcher then took a small fife from his pocket and began to blow on it. Rats and mice immediately came from every house and gathered around him. When he thought that he had them all, he led them to the river Weser, where he pulled up his clothes and walked into the water. The animals all followed him, fell in, and drowned. Now that the citizens had been freed of their plague, they regretted having promised so much money, and using all kinds of excuses, they refused to pay him. Finally he went away, bitter and angry. He returned on June 26th, St. John's and St. Paul's Day, early in the morning at 7 o'clock. Others say it was at noon. Now dressed in a hunter's costume, with a dreadful look on his face, and wearing a strange red hat. He sounded his fife in the streets, but this time it wasn't rats and mice that came to him, but rather children. A great number of boys and girls from their 4th year on. Among them was the mayor's grown daughter. The swarm followed him, and he led them into a mountain, where he disappeared with them. All this was seen by a babysitter who, carrying a child in her arms, had followed from a distance, but then had turned around and carried the news back to town. The anxious parents ran in droves to the town gates seeking their children. The mothers cried out and sobbed pitifully. Within the hour, messengers were sent everywhere by land and messengers were sent everywhere by water and by land, inquiring if the children, or any of them, had been seen, but it was all for naught. In total, 130 were lost. 2, as some say, had lagged behind and come back. One of them was blind and the other mute. The blind one was not able to point out the place, but was able to tell how they had followed the piper. The mute one was able to point out the place, although he or she had heard nothing. One little boy in shirt sleeves had gone along with the others, but had turned back to fetch his jacket and thus escaped the tragedy, for when he returned, the others had already disappeared into a cave within a hill. This cave is still shown. Until the middle of the 18th century, and probably still today, the street through which the children were led out of the town gate was called the Bungerlose, drumless, soundless, quiet street, because no dancing or music was allowed there. Indeed, when a bridal procession on its way to the church crossed this street, the musicians would have to stop playing. The mountain near Hameln, where the children disappeared, is called Poppenberg. 2 stone monuments in the form of crosses have been erected there, one on the left side and one on the right. Some say that the children were led into a cave, and that they came out again in Transylvania. The citizens of Hameln recorded this event in their town register, and they came to date all their proclamations according to the years and days since the loss of their children. According to Seyfried, the 22nd rather than the 26th of June was entered into the town register. The following lines were inscribed on the town hall. In the year 1284, after the birth of Christ, from Hameln were led away 130 children, born at this place, led away by a piper into a mountain, and on the new gate this was inscribed in Latin. This gate was built 272 years after the magician led the 130 children from the city. In the year 1572, the mayor had the story portrayed in the church windows. The accompanying inscription has become largely illegible. In addition, a coin was minted in memory of the event. And that is the Brothers Grimm's The Children of Hameln. Die Kinder zu Hameln is that German version of the story that we all know very well, the Pied Piper. Whether that story comes from the Grimms or Robert Browning, Schwartz Grasse, it's a story we all know very well, and one that has its roots in history. There truly is a town that had its children mysteriously disappear, although many historians and scholars think that it was a plague of some kind. This is Dan Scholz for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere that you like to get your podcasts. You can also follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio and TuneIn Radio and iHeartRadio. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every weekday morning. Thanks for listening.